Conflict is one of the most misunderstood parts of a relationship because we tend to define conflict by its loudest expression. So we think about raised voices or escalation and disagreement, when someone gets defensive or when an argument breaks out, when two people just can't seem to get along. But that's not actually when conflict starts. That's just when conflict finally becomes impossible to ignore. Conflict actually starts much earlier. It starts when your patterns begin costing someone else emotionally. So your silence, maybe your tone or your distance, your inconsistencies, your avoidance of certain things, when your presence, absence, habits, or behavior begins affecting another person, that's when conflict arises. And if you don't fully understand this, what happens is you will keep trying to solve arguments, but ignoring what actually caused it, and then miss the real problem that's destroying connection underneath. So let's dive in today to begin exploring this. It might not come as any surprise to you that we have all been taught a very shallow definition of conflict. We have actually reduced conflict to mean fighting or drama, defensiveness, disagreement, raised voices. But these are just expressions of conflict, not its essence. Disagreement alone is not conflict because two emotionally mature people can disagree constantly and still remain connected. And two emotionally immature people can avoid arguing for years while destroying one another in constant conflict. Because conflict is not about the noise that's created. It's actually about impact. Conflict surfaces when one person's behavior creates an emotional consequence for another person, or when how you show up begins to create a consequence for another person. So when what you say, what you don't say, what you do and what you avoid, what you repeat, the things you normalize, when those things start affecting another person, that's conflict. I promise you, once you understand this, relationships start making a lot more sense. So let me show you how this plays out in everyday relationships. Let's take a husband who works nonstop. He tells himself, I'm doing this for us. I'm providing. I'm sacrificing. Maybe all of that is actually true. But at home, his wife feels incredibly emotionally alone. She starts becoming colder, less affectionate, more distance. And he is left feeling confused because he thinks he's doing everything right for the family. He may be actually doing things right, but he is also ignoring the impact his behavior has on his wife. This is where so many people get stuck because they think intention should cancel the effect that their behavior has. But it doesn't. No matter how much we don't want it to, it doesn't. Intent offers an explanation of behavior, but impact is what actually shapes your relationships. Some of the most damaging people in relationships are not malicious people. They're just unaware. So they think, I didn't mean anything by it, or I was just joking, or that's just how I am, or you know I love you. And all of that might be true. But love itself does not erase the impact. Relationships are lived through experience, not private intentions. And intention does not erase the experience. So if your joke repeatedly humiliates someone, that creates impact. If every disagreement ends in shutdown, that creates impact. If your busyness repeatedly leaves someone abandoned, that creates impact. If your inconsistency keeps someone anxious, that creates impact. You don't get to determine the impact of how you affect people on your own. The people around you do, because they are the ones who experience it. Now, that doesn't mean they're always right, but it does mean your self-perception and your intentions are really only half the story here. And this is where things get interesting, because the second impact is named, most people stop listening and start protecting themselves. So many people hear another person say, "Hey, this affected me," and translate it into "I'm bad," or "I'm failing," or "I'm being attacked." So instead of listening, they just become defensive and they justify their behavior. They minimize your feelings. They counterattack. They might even bring up another person's flaws or change the subject, disappear emotionally. Anything really to avoid the discomfort of seeing themselves more clearly. Emotionally immature people hear blame. Emotionally mature people understand that their impact on others does not need to translate into shame. They can tolerate the responsibility of their behavior because in its simplest form, that's all it is a responsibility and an acknowledgement that our behavior impacts other people. You can be a good person and still hurt people. You can have loving intentions and still create pain. You can actually care really deeply about someone and still be difficult to experience. And that is not a failure, it just means that you're being human. And part of being human is not about perfection. It's actually more about awareness. So when we avoid the impact that we have on other people, it does not ever protect our goodness. It only protects our blindness. While the people around us continue to live with the consequences of our behavior. So let me give you another example, because this dynamic shows up way too often and far more subtly than most people realize. Okay, so I want you to think about a parent who says, "I gave my kids everything." Listen, that might financially be true, but if the person also experienced criticism, emotional distance, unpredictability, or fear, then everything that you gave them was actually an incomplete version of the story. Or let's say maybe the partner who says, "I never cheated and I never lied." Okay, but were you dismissive, emotionally unavailable, passive, cold? People often defend themselves with what they didn't do in a relationship, but your relationships suffer more from what you consistently do. And this is why some people can feel innocent after a severed relationship, because they were never the one carrying the pain. Okay, I want to bring this back around and kind of ground you for a minute. The point is that conflict is not proof that a relationship is failing. Conflict is proof that impact exists. That is it. And once you stop seeing conflict as the enemy, you can finally use it to understand someone better. Because the truth is that conflict reveals where someone feels unseen, what patterns are hurting the trust in the relationship, what needs are being unmet, where behavior and words are disconnected, where something important can no longer be ignored. This means the goal is not to avoid conflict. The absence of conflict is not the marker of relationship health. In fact, Absence of conflict is actually more likely the marker of suppression, because conflict is inevitable in any meaningful relationship, because impact is inevitable. Two people cannot matter to each other without affecting each other. So avoidance is not the answer. The real goal is conscious conflict. Conflict where impact can be explored and where consequence matters more than our egos, and where understanding matters way more than just being right. This is why conflict can actually create more closeness, because when we explore our impact on another person, we learn and lean into their world, creating intimacy through honesty and repair. If multiple people keep giving you the same feedback, at some point the issue may not be their sensitivity. If every ex describes the same wound, your intentions may be innocent, but your impact on others may be a pattern. And I'm going to be honest here, that can sometimes be uncomfortable to face. But it's also where growth happens. So the next time that conflict shows up, try to stop asking who's right, who started it, who overreacted, and ask something deeper. What impact is happening here? Because the question isn't only whether you meant well. The question is, what does it feel like to live with your patterns? And people who learn to understand their impact become safer to love. People who only defend their intentions are not only confusing, but also exhausting to be close to. And that may be the simplest difference between emotional maturity and emotional immaturity, because one protects self-image and the other protects connection. Conflict was never and is not the enemy. Unawareness is. The people who grow, heal, and build lasting relationships are not the people who avoid conflict. They're actually the people just willing to use conflict as feedback instead of taking it as an insult. Now, this might have been difficult for some of you today, but if this challenged you, that means that we're getting closer to reality. In the next couple of weeks, I'm going to explain why relationships are not sustained by feelings alone. They're actually sustained by reciprocity and exchange. So if that's something that you're interested in learning about, please make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're ready and willing to have the conversations most people avoid.